Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at the spectacular rise and the incredibly steep fall of the Qin state. Think of it as a massive historical mystery. We're going to figure out how a state machine, one that was literally engineered from the ground up for total, absolute conquest, ended up completely destroying itself the second it found peace. It's a wild story of power, massive ambition, and honestly the absolute limits of what human beings can endure.
14. After generations, and I mean literally generations, of intense, calculated state building meant to conquer the entirety of the known political world in ancient China, the unified Qin Empire lasted just 14 years. I mean, let that sink in for a second. We're talking about an empire built with the intention to last for 10,000 generations, and it practically imploded the minute it crossed the finish line.
So, that brings us to the big question. How on earth could the ultimate conqueror turn out to be so incredibly fragile? Well, we're going to dig into this central contradiction today. We'll take a completely impartial look at the systemic logic here. The very same structural design that made Qin strong enough to swallow all its rivals whole is exactly what made it way too rigid to survive its own success. This isn't just a story about a bad ruler. It's a story about structural design.
Section 1. Building the machine, from frontier state to powerhouse.
To really understand this machine, we've got to look out to the western frontier. Reformers there, like Sheng Yang, realized early on that just having a strong army wasn't going to cut it in the brutal competition of the warring states period. They needed to completely rewire society. So they intentionally smashed the old aristocratic systems, the setup where power just flowed through wealthy families and who your father was. In its place, they built this reforming state where power flowed strictly through institutions. Your status, your wealth, your opportunities, they were tied to one thing and one thing only: how well you served the state, either out in the fields or on the battlefield.
But to pull that off, the government needed absolute visibility into everyone's lives. Every single household was counted, every plot of land was measured, agricultural output was strictly assessed, and military merit was rewarded big time. It was an incredibly intrusive system. The individual was essentially locked into the state's goals through a really extreme balancing act. Huge opportunities if you served well, and absolutely terrifying, uncompromising punishments if you failed.
Section 2. Unifying the warring states. Let's see the machine at work. Once they engineered this hyper-disciplined society, Qin took all that domestic efficiency and unleashed it as a military juggernaut for foreign conquest. The sheer momentum here is staggering. You can trace it from Duke Xiao's reforms in the 4th century BCE right through the absolute devastation of the Battle of Chengping in 260 BCE, all the way to 221 BCE. It took generations of strategic patience and relentless warfare, but it finally culminated in the total defeat of every single rival state by a ruler named Ying Zheng.
Now that he governed this newly unified world, Ying Zheng decided he needed an upgrade. He elevated himself and created a brand new title: Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of Qin. And look, this wasn't just some ceremonial pat on the back. It was a massive neon sign signaling unprecedented, centralized authority. He was officially ending the old multipolar order of independent, competing kings and replacing them with a massive centralized bureaucracy. Everyone was now under one roof.
To force all these wildly different, fragmented regions into one single administrative reality, the imperial government just relentlessly standardized everyday life. We're talking weights and measures, coinage, writing systems, administrative laws, and massive road networks. And sure, standardizing all that made trade and moving armies incredibly efficient, but it severely reduced local autonomy. Everyone was suddenly forced right into the exact same Qin mold.
Section 3. The price of order. Looking at the human cost of unification.
Bart, you have to admit this centralization was a masterclass in administration. It came with a truly devastating human cost. The power of the state basically moved out of the palace and directly into the structure of everyday life. The empire's incredible capacity to build these massive road networks, huge defensive walls, and raise staggering armies meant ordinary folks were hit with constant labor demands, relentless military conscription, and backbreaking taxes. Unification didn't bring peace to the average person, it just left them completely and utterly exhausted.
Which brings up a really crucial question. What actually happens when exceptional wartime measures just become everyday, ordinary life? This is exactly why this story matters so much for our understanding of how power works. When a state permanently relies on the logic of wartime sacrifice, basically treating every single civilian like a disposable resource for the state's power, It seriously risks pushing society way past the limits of human endurance. The machinery of conquest demanded constant fuel, and eventually, the people literally had nothing left to give.
Section 4. A spectacular collapse. Hitting the breaking point.
That fatal breaking point hit suddenly in 210 BCE, when the first emperor died, which instantly kicked off a vicious, chaotic succession crisis. And here's where the fatal flaw gets totally exposed. Without the one specific guy the system was designed to obey, the machine lost its compass. It revealed this massive imbalance between capacity and resilience. See, Qin had unbelievable capacity. They could mobilize millions of laborers and raise massive armies across a whole continent. But they had absolutely zero resilience. The system was totally optimized for top-down orders. It was never built to handle internal crises or negotiate adjustments when things went wrong.
As our source text so profoundly points out, when rulers fear the people around them, political systems become unstable. And that is exactly what happened under the second emperor and highly manipulative court officials like Zhao Gao. Institutional confidence just vanished, replaced completely by paranoia and fear. Honest information stopped flowing because people were terrified to bring bad news to the court. So the state just turned inward, consuming its own elite in these bloody, paranoid political purges. The center was quite literally rotting away.
And because this system ruthlessly punished failure, often with death, everyday people eventually realized they had absolutely nothing to lose. The spark came in 209 BCE. A group of conscripted soldiers led by Chen Sheng and Wu Guang were delayed by heavy rain. Knowing the penalty for being late was execution anyway, they figured, why not rebel? That resistance spread like wildfire. Old kingdom loyalties suddenly reemerged. The central military was stretched way too thin across multiple fronts to stop it, and local officials started doing the math, choosing to escape rather than go down with a dying ship.
Section 5. The Surviving Legacy. What remains after a collapse like that?
The central authority dissolved incredibly fast, but here is the fascinating twist to all of this. The Qin dynasty died, but their monumental idea of a unified imperial China actually survived. What Qin perfectly demonstrates is this tragic three-step cycle of power. Step 1, you build, accumulate power and enforce intense institutional discipline. Step 2, you flourish, expand your territory, your wealth, your military might. But then comes Step 3, collapse. Because excessive demands and a total lack of flexibility inevitably lead to failure. They built a machine that knew exactly how to accelerate, but they never, ever learned how to stop.
I want to wrap up this explainer with a final, really provocative thought directly inspired by the text, Qin's greatest strength helped create its greatest weakness. Think about that for a second. If a system is really only as strong as its ability to recognize its own limits, well, how resilient are the modern institutions we rely on today when they're put under extraordinary stress? Are we currently prioritizing pure capacity over actual resilience? It is a fascinating question, and honestly, just as relevant today as it was over 2 millennia ago. Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, keep questioning the structures around you.